This presentation is going to answer the following question. To what extent is Prensky's dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants a helpful way for us to understand our interaction with computing technologies? This multimedia presentation is going to argue that Prensky's dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants is to a little extent a helpful way for us to understand our interaction with computing technologies. It will begin with an overview of Prensky's dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants before then going on to look at identified issues surrounding the overall helpfulness of this dichotomy in showing us how we interact with computing technologies. The terms digital native and digital immigrant are derived from Prensky, who reveals that a digital native is someone who has grown up with technology or born after 1980, whereas the latter is someone who did not grow up surrounded by technology and was born prior to 1980. Prensky argues through his dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants that digital immigrants have to teach themselves to use computing technologies and refers to the process as like learning a new language, whereas for digital natives, technology is a huge part of their everyday life. This therefore creates a division between generations due to computing technologies being more apparent and essentially a natural part of digital natives' lives, whereas the older generation, who are considered to be digital immigrants, did not have computing technologies readily available as they grew up. Prensky places a great emphasis on students within the classroom and highlights the idea that education levels are declining because the methods of teaching are outdated with regards to how students or digital natives prefer to learn. For example, Prensky identifies that college graduates spend on average double the amount of time playing video games compared to reading, and therefore he suggests that teaching techniques should be adapted to suit this tech-reliant generation. This means teachers, or digital immigrants, need to learn this new technological practice in order to ensure their methods of teaching are suitable to what digital natives are accustomed to in their everyday lives. West reveals through a survey undertaken by Project Tomorrow that 52% of students said that a tablet computer was essential to their learning. This means 48% did not believe this to be the case, and therefore raising a flaw within Prensky's dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants that perhaps not all students rely heavily on technology and do not view computing technologies as vital to their studies. The survey also revealed that out of the school's administrators, 51% said that access to a computer or tablet was important within students' learning. This highlights that almost half of Prensky's so-called digital natives and half of digital immigrants side with each other. In addition to this, Further research has found that students actually prefer the more linear and traditional forms of learning. Therefore, only to some extent is Prensky's dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants a helpful way of understanding our interaction with computing technologies, because as well as there being a division between digital natives and immigrants, half of digital natives are viewing computing technologies in a similar way to what all digital immigrants, according to Prensky, are viewing computing technologies, and vice versa. Bennett, Mayton and Kevin argue that there is a vast variation within the two separate groups, digital natives and digital immigrants, as there is between them. According to Prensky's dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants, the older generation was socialized differently from today's younger generation. Prensky argues that digital immigrants are not teaching in a way that suits digital natives. Apparently, all digital immigrants hold very little appreciation for computing technologies being introduced as part of learning. However, in contrast to Prensky's view, Ransdell discovered that a group of older online learners actually produce stronger work than younger online learners because of their ability to analyze material deeper. This would suggest that despite the younger generation growing up with technology, it does not mean that it helps them to perform stronger academically, which is what Prensky is implying. This research also disrupts the notion that the older generation are not as well acquainted with technology. This therefore furthers the argument that Prensky's dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants is to little extent helpful for us to understand our interaction with computing technologies. Prensky believes that the education system needs to change and include more computing technologies to help students' education. However, research looking into the relationship between students and technology has found that the internet encourages nonlinear thinking and students rely on the internet to find results in information needed to complete a task quicker than if they were using books. Therefore, there is less engagement with academic material and the learning has almost become about how little time it takes to complete a task. Sutherland Smith suggests that there is less engagement with academic material and the learning has almost become about how little time it takes to complete a task. Students would rather get their assignment done as quickly as possible as opposed to taking longer and processing the academic information deeper in order to better their chances of getting a higher grade. Therefore, it could be argued that computing technologies are the reason for the decline in American education levels, because computers provide answers so quickly it requires less thinking. As mentioned previously, Prensky's dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants is responding to the decline in American education levels. Therefore, Prensky fails to take into consideration whether this concept can be applied to other countries, especially developing countries where computing technologies are less readily available. Vinyane recognises that in South Africa the number of schools with access to at least one computer is significantly lower than schools in developed countries. Vinyane found that participants in South Africa did not appear to be interested in using computing technologies as part of their learning. Therefore, Prensky's dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants is to a great extent not a helpful way for us to understand our interaction with computing technologies, because it can only be applied to American students and is not necessarily the case in other countries, especially developing countries with limited access to computing technologies. Prensky believes that everyone born after 1980 has grown up with technology as a prominent part of their lives, whereas in reality many people born after 1980 all over the world have not been introduced to computing technologies, and therefore will use more traditional materials such as books, pens and paper to aid their learning. This therefore implies that digital natives are in fact a worldwide minority. In conclusion, to little extent is Prensky's dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants a helpful way for us to understand our interaction with computing technologies. It has been identified that categorizing people as digital natives and digital immigrants based upon their age is a weak way of identifying how we interact with computing technologies. As this presentation has revealed, there is as much variation within the two groups with regards to how people interact with computing technologies as there is between the two groups. In addition to this multimedia presentation has discovered that in some cases, digital immigrants produce stronger academic work from using computing technologies compared to digital natives. This may be because digital natives are more interested in taking up less time to complete tasks and because computing technologies can produce answers so quickly. Furthering this, digital immigrants are used to having to process information deeper because of the lack of technology as they were growing up. Therefore, the problem causing a decline in education levels in America may be due to computing technologies encouraging shallow information processing. Because digital natives have grown up surrounded by computing technologies, shallow processing is all they are used to. Finally, Prensky's dichotomy is not helpful for understanding people's interaction with computing technologies anywhere but the United States of America. It does not take into account developing countries which do not have regular access to computing technologies in the way America does.